ready for a normal day of work. Oh, hi, Patrick. Hi, Sandy.
Y'all notice something a little not normal today?
Depends. Does that count?
That's not normal at all! Plankton, is this your evil scheme?
Bubbles the Talking Dolphin!
SpongeBob Plankton didn't do this. You see, someone is using the last page from a magic book to make weird things happen.
What kind of weird things?
Like this, for example. Using this page I just found, I gave you superhero powers. Temporarily, at least.
Hey, that was weird.
Find the last page and pick up any other pages like this one before reality as we know it ceases to exist. Shouldn't be too hard. Good luck.
But how are we supposed to find random pages from some book?
Hey, look! A random book page!
Awesome. It's true! The clarinet is really, really, really hard to play underwater.
Hello everyone, and welcome to SpongeBob Hero Pants. We played up to the first boss in Behavior Interactive's first SpongeBob game, so now we're going to play up to the first boss in Behavior Interactive's second SpongeBob game. Unlike Plankton's Robotic Revenge, this one actually is a 3D platformer. And it's a very blocky looking 3D platformer, but I wouldn't say it's inspired by Mario 3D Land, because the level design is very different. It's a lot more basic. How the game works basically is you move from one enclosed area to the next and collect keys to open the way forward or press buttons and solve button puzzles. The combat is a lot more simple than it is in Plankton's Robotic Revenge. You just mash the X button to perform melee, and the game is perfectly alright with you mashing the X button. In fact, the game seems to expect that you will. These stinky bubble enemies, the first enemy in the game, hurt you if they run into you, but they also die in one hit, making them the easiest enemy in the game. We can also jump and slam on them using our ground slam attack, and that will destroy them just as well, if not better in most instances. Collecting keys can do a variety of things, but the most important thing is that collecting keys always opens a pathway forward, whether that be moving platforms, moving the scenery, or opening doors. Keys make you go forward, and usually you'll know when you need keys. Here's our second method of attack in the game, Nasty Patties, which are called Blaster Burgers for some reason. They auto-lock onto enemies, and we throw them by pressing the Y button. You can see a target under the enemy that you're about to throw at, so you can make sure you're aiming at the right one. The auto-aiming can be a little bit overzealous sometimes. The throwable Nasty Patties, or I guess Blaster Burgers, deal more damage than any other attack in the game, which is appropriate because you have to grab them from crates, and there's a very limited number of them. You can throw them at any direction from anywhere. These spatulas are the second enemy type. They take more hits than the Stinky Bubble, and they try to slam the ground to attack you. Just a very basic enemy type, really. And up here, you can see the most important mechanic in the game. We can press the B button when our superhero meter is full to transform into our super form. In SpongeBob's case, it's Invincibubble. Now when you're in your super form, you have a longer jump, a higher jump, and you have a new projectile. Each character has a different projectile. Invincibubbles is that he shoots bubbles. Who would have guessed? The bubbles can be fired as rapidly as you can press the button, and it's probably the best projectile attack, though they do try to vary up the way the projectile attacks work. When you're in your super form, mashing the melee button becomes even easier as well. So, you know, it just makes the game easier and more fun in general. When our superhero meter goes down, as it does drain while we're in our super form, we will revert back to normal SpongeBob. How we fill up our superhero meter is just, we wait. The superhero meter refills on its own, or we can grab a lightning bolt to refill it instantly. Those are our two options. And you can see right here the increased jump we get from our superpowered form. It's a good little tutorial to show you that you jump further when you're superpowered. feel like that was a bit of good design there, showing you how the extra jump height and length can affect platforming. Now, it is worth saying that I have upgraded SpongeBob fully before doing this Let's Play, because I feel like the game is more interesting if you can see all of the abilities at their fullest. The abilities aren't remarkable or anything, they're standard 3D platforming abilities, but I wanted to give you the best impression of the game possible, which isn't something I normally do. Normally I just try to show games as they are, but in SpongeBob Hero Pants' case, if I don't show you the game in its best light, it's just going to be me being negative all the time. Up here there's another new enemy type. There's a Plankton bot. These fire projectiles at you. They're the first enemy to shoot projectiles. I usually use a Nasty Patty to take care of them, but if you can't, just jumping over their laser and attacking them with melee works perfectly fine. Doing it with a Nasty Patty just takes less time, that's all. Using the ground slam attack is probably the most satisfying way to destroy enemies in this game, so I try to do that more when I'm recording. I also go out of my way to grab any Nasty Patties because when we're not superpowered, that does make combat go a lot faster. We're near the end of the stage now, and you can see the first genuine platforming hazard up here. These rotating platforms that lead us up to the top of these little towers where we will where we will collect keys to open the way to the exit. It's pretty alright. Maybe should have put something like this more near the start of the stage, but for a first stage, this wasn't too awful. It taught you what you needed to know about the game design, introduced you to the longer and higher jump of the superhero form. You know, you get the idea of how the game is structured.
Hooray! Woohoo! Yes! Yeah!
You can see recognizable pieces of SpongeBob's scenery in the background, such as the Shady Shoals retirement home. But if you try to interact with the background scenery, you will clip through it, such as you're seeing here, so I recommend not doing that. Oh, I forgot to mention something about the superhero form. You also run faster while you're in your superhero form. So generally, the superhero form just makes the game less cumbersome. You can take a lot of shortcuts through the levels, combat is easier, jumping is easier. Even pushing blocks is easier when we get to that mechanic. Now, the idea behind Bikini Bottom here in the first world of Hero Pants is that it's been turned into a war zone. It's not obvious at first, but as you get further into the world, you'll start to see more and more war decorations, more mines, more trenches, more sandbags, you know, that kind of stuff. Usually the keys are guarded by either a platforming challenge or enemies, but the enemies are pretty much a non-threat. If you were very, very, very young, I could maybe see the enemies hurting you, but if you're old enough to figure out that you can mash the X button, then you're old enough to not get hit by the enemies. All of the characters also have an obscene amount of health, so it's very, very hard to die. Incredibly so. It feels like health pickups are unnecessary with how easy the combat is in this game. The feedback for hitting enemies isn't so great. The feedback is better when you're using SpongeBob's super projectile, because you get to see them turn into bubbles and it makes a really weird cartoonish noise. But for basic combat, it's not so great. The feedback, it mostly feels like you're hitting air, which is unfortunate. This game is being played on the Xbox 360 version, which is the only real version of the game as far as I'm concerned. There are 3DS and Vita versions, but they are far inferior. They have more graphical glitches, they run worse, and the 3DS version in particular is missing a lot of the level design, and does not make use of the 3DS's graphical capabilities at all. Now, obviously, this game is not making great use of the 360's graphical capabilities either. It's not a very good-looking game. The character animations are very odd-looking, especially compared to Plankton's Robotic Revenge, where they were quite nice. And I think most of the issues with the graphics and other technical problems in this game were caused by the fact that the developers, Behavior Interactive, were using an engine they were unfamiliar with. They were using the Unity engine, where previously they had either made their own engines or used a different engine entirely. This was their first time developing using the Unity engine, and I think it was their last. I assume their use of the Unity engine was mandated by Activision, the publisher, because I really can't think of another reason they would switch to the Unity engine. It just seems such a bizarre choice. I realize the Unity engine is cheaper though, so that might be why Activision wanted them to use it. In this area, the idea is to use these moving platforms to reach 3 switches scattered in different places across this landscape, so we can proceed. The switches are meant to be difficult to get to because there are enemies guarding the floating platforms you use to reach the switches, but again, the enemies are really a non-threat. And it's a shame because the enemies are not placed in bad positions or anything. There seems to have been some thought that went into the enemy placement. Like, they put the projectile enemies on pedestals and further away from the other enemies, and they switch up the melee types of enemies, trying to put them where they think they would be best suited. But it really just boils down to either spamming the melee attack or spamming the projectile attack. I understand that nuances in the combat system was probably not a top priority when developing this game because it seems like there was very little time to make the game before it had to be released. But other SpongeBob games put much more effort into the combat. Here's one of the very few areas where the combat is mandatory. We have to defeat all these guys. And, you know, just spamming the nasty patty seems to be the best way, because it kills everything almost instantly. We must have missed an enemy somewhere. Anyway, other SpongeBob games put much more effort into the combat, especially Plankton's Robotic Revenge, which is entirely combat, and it relies on a variety of guns. But even the superhero form does not make the combat, you know, entertaining in this one, really. You're just doing the same thing you were when you weren't superpowered, it just goes faster. And the animation is more humorous. I think part of the reason this game feels like such a disappointment is because SpongeBob set a really high bar for licensed game platformers, especially with Battle for Bikini Bottom. What little 3D objects there are in the background do look nice, but it really makes me just want to go into the background, because you can see there are roads back there leading to houses, and there's SpongeBob's pineapple and stuff. It just really makes me want to go back there, but I can't, because if I do, I'll die. One of the common complaints about this game is that the death pits look identical to the sand you can walk on. I'm not sure about identical, but the death pits do look like sand you could just walk on. Like, there's no reason to believe if I fall down here I should die. It's just normal sand, the kind they can always walk on in the show. This enemy type, the radar station, tries to lock onto us with a reticle and drop bombs on us from above. As long as we avoid the reticle, we'll be fine. We already defeated the radar station. There are a lot of enemies that just run straight towards you. There are a lot of those, and some of them are recycled enemies from Plankton's Robotic Revenge, but I feel like that's an insult to Plankton's Robotic Revenge because the enemies in that game served more of a purpose than the enemies here. You didn't have to expend a lot of effort to kill them in Plankton's Robotic Revenge, but you had to try to not get hit at the very least. I want to make it clear I am absolutely putting in far more effort than is actually necessary when playing the game. Like, there's no reason to stop and fight every enemy, you can run past most of them. There's no reason to vary your attacks, because you can just spam X most of the time. The game tries to place radar stations in tactically advantageous positions, but because you can jump over pretty much every enemy in your way, it's really not an issue to get to them and destroy them before anything else. And their reticle moves so slow that you don't have to put much effort into avoiding it. It's cute that they tried, again, to put the enemies in thoughtful positions. It just doesn't work out too much, because the enemies are too easy to fight. You might not even notice they put them in different positions because you'll just be destroying them too quickly. You know, if the enemies are this easy to destroy, it's probably better that they didn't even bother to put them in thoughtful positions. That's kind of sad, because they tried, but it just clearly didn't matter. And there are ways the enemy types could have been made better to fix this issue, but I'm sure Behavior Interactive was aware of that. I don't get the impression this game was released in the state they wanted it to release in. I get the feeling that when they were making this game, they knew they were going to have to release a product that was not okay. They probably had a very short time frame to work with. They were working with an engine they were unfamiliar with. You know, this jump over here, not supposed to be done like this, but it's much easier to do with your super form than do it the way they intended you to. So that's how we're doing it. Anyway, this game is just a little bit sad. I'm not saying you can't enjoy it. Like, I'm not saying it's physically impossible to enjoy this game. It is mindless, and you jump around and collect stuff if you're into that.
Yes! Yeah!
Here you can see the destroyed aesthetic and warlike environmental objects are much more prominent in the level design. Well, sorry, in the environmental design. Level design is a different thing. Like, it looks much more like a war zone. There are rockets in the ground, there's destroyed scenery. You know, there's a lot more going on to make it feel like a war zone here. So, the idea behind this section is that we press a switch, and it lowers a platform so we can reach another switch, and that lowers another platform so we can reach another switch. It's such a linear kind of progression, and it requires going backward. The only reason I remember this section is because I've played the game so many times at this point. The chum bucket's in the background, but that's not where the chum bucket goes. That is not where the chum bucket is in relation to anyone else's house. It's just a little bit sad to see SpongeBob in this state, because even games like Boating Bash, they had an idea. They wanted to be a video game. There was an idea. As much as people hated Plankton's Robotic Revenge, it was well-intentioned. It had a concept for a video game, and the concept wasn't bad, regardless of the execution. It had a desire to be a video game. It had a desire to be a unique SpongeBob product. You know, the people behind the game looked at it and said, yeah, this is a concept for a video game, and we're gonna go with it. It was trying to be something. Hero Pants, I'm not sure it's trying to be something. I'm not sure it was made out of anything except obligation. You can still see there's love, thought, and care put into Plankton's Robotic Revenge. You can still see that. This game, not so much. The graphics in this game are even noticeably worse than the graphics in Plankton's Robotic Revenge, and keep in mind, we were playing the Wii version of Plankton's Robotic Revenge, which was the worst looking version of that game. And it still looks better than this, which is very, very depressing. This section of the level really sticks out. It really sticks out for the whole game, really, because there's very few sections like this in the game where you see a unique piece of scenery or a unique obstacle, like this maze. It's a shame it's over so quickly. There should be more unique obstacles and unique scenery like this maze in the game. A common complaint is that the levels seem to blend together. I think that would happen less if there was more unique scenery like that maze. Like, that maze is legitimately a highlight of the entire game, and it lasts well under a minute. It lasts well under 30 seconds if you want it to. You know, I've played Plankton's Robotic Revenge and Hero Pants both many, many times. And I still like Plankton's Robotic Revenge. I didn't used to, but when I first got the game, my opinion was that it was a good game, if a bit generic and middle of the road, and the developers clearly cared. They had design ideas, and they wanted to see those designs become reality, even if there were some bad choices made here and there. Like, the core concept of the design in Plankton's Robotic Revenge is perfectly chill. The game functions well, it looks good, and it's just not awful. You know what I'm saying? But then I play Hero Pants, and I don't see a desire to create in this game. I also see a lot of clipping in this game. That's not to say the way this game turned out is Behavior Interactive's fault. It was most likely Activision's fault, because if we look at Plankton's Robotic Revenge, we can see that Behavior cares. We can see they want to make good video games, and we can also see that in their past video games. With Plankton's Robotic Revenge, they were thinking like, yeah, we're going to make a good SpongeBob game. And in this game they cared too, it's just the care didn't matter as much. Some of the lines of dialogue in this game, sadly the ones that you don't hear very often for some reason, are actually pretty decent. There's a comment Plankton makes about fighting Plankton robots, and he says it's a shame because he usually loves robots, which is pretty funny because he spends a lot of the various SpongeBob games destroying thousands of robots. And I assume they knew that, and that was the joke. But my favorite line of the game by far, which is very hard to trigger, is one from Mr. Krabs where he says, "There's nothing wrong with this day that $100 can't fix." That one actually almost made me laugh, which I did not see coming in this game. It's a really cute mix of both greed and relatability, you know? It's actually a very well-written line, and I wish there was more of that in this game. A lot of the dialogue in this game is recycled from Plankton's Robotic Revenge. Some of the characters have the same one-liners. For example, Mr. Krabs' description of jumps and double jumps is identical to Plankton's Robotic Revenge. The in-between loading screen blurbs are identical to Plankton's Robotic Revenge. SpongeBob's quips about destroying the smaller enemies is identical to Plankton's Robotic Revenge. I don't understand if these were intentional references, or they just didn't have any ideas, or they ran out of time. But overall, Hero Fans feels like a very unfinished pseudo-sequel to Plankton's Robotic Revenge because of all the references to Robotic Revenge, the same developer. And, I don't know. It's just kind of sad to see that this is what happened after Plankton's Robotic Revenge, because Plankton's Robotic Revenge had a lot of promise in it. A promise that you'll end up seeing eventually, of course, but here's the tank enemy. What you do is you walk up to it and you mash X if you want to kill it. Like this. There you go. Tank enemy's gone. There's only 2 tank enemies in the game, and that was one of them. Neither time you fight them are they any challenge. You just hit them. The bounce pads, or jellyfish, whatever you want to call them in this game, don't require any additional input or challenge, really. They're all so close together that it's not difficult to time your jumps at all. And up here, I don't think you could call this a button puzzle. It's just so plainly obvious what to do. I do like that we can skip the ride down here by jumping using our super form. I doubt it was intentional, but hey, I'll take skips where I can get them. Except, actually, I'm not taking a lot of skips in this game right now. Now, when I recorded the game for a long play, I ran past most of the enemies and skipped a lot of the platforming because, you know, I feel like when you're making a long play, you need to be as honest to the game's design as possible. But for this Let's Play, which is created for the purpose of discussion, I want to show you they at least tried to do something, even if they failed at it. Again, you can completely run past most of the enemies with no issue. Every enemy I'm fighting here can just jump right past it. And you can see right here the auto-aim for the Nasty Patties is weird. You can see that I'm trying to attack the enemies with the Nasty Patties, but the Nasty Patties are flying into outer space instead of actually targeting the enemy directly in front of me, which is unfortunate, to say the least. We are about to fight the first boss of the game, which is actually technically the only boss.
What gives, Plankton? I thought you and your buds were on our side now!
I thought so too. This one's gone haywire.
Let's give this bot a reboot.
So this boss isn't horrible, and unlike a game like, say, Monster High 13 Wishes, it's not a shock that this developer can actually create boss battles. The idea is that you want to attack the robot's eye, and sometimes the robot will summon minions, and you have to destroy the minions while still trying to attack its eye. The robot has a few attacks of its own, but they are incredibly well telegraphed, and even if you get hit by almost every single one, you probably will not die. This is arguably the most challenging part of the game, and it is less than half as challenging as Plankton's Robotic Revenge. And Plankton's Robotic Revenge isn't a terribly difficult game, to say the least about it. To say positive things about this boss fight, I like the boss's health bar. I think the idea of the boss's attacks are fine enough. I like that you can attack the boss at almost any time. I like that you're in your superhero form during the whole boss fight, so that way you can use your increased movement to make the boss more fun. But the boss fight is still really boring and not... It's not very good, but I'm sure you can see that by looking at it. Now, this boss looks good in screenshots, and if you were to show a single attack from the boss and then, you know, switch to a different area of the game, you could probably make this boss look a lot more thrilling than it actually is. I don't know, this game just, it feels kind of sad to me. It just feels a little sad. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. I know a lot of people were angry about the game, but surely I'm not the only one that feels sad about it. Anyway, that's the first world. We've beaten the first boss. See you next time for more Plankton's Robotic Revenge.
Hooray! Woohoo! Yes! Yeah!
Yay! Superhero stuff!
There's only one Plankton, baby!
Thank Neptune! Now we can go home!
Look! Another page over there!
Never mind.